For more love stories, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. The instant I met the gaze of the I was having problems with the waiter, not the type of crisis that frightens you, but the type that causes your heart to race quicken and take a quick breath. A bit too quickly, the type of issue that entices you and challenges you to leave the meticulously formed lines for yourself. It began with a minor thing, a quick look that lingered a bit, to a little glimmer of curiosity in his blue gaze as he set the glass of wine in his fingertips, stroking the stem in front of me for a longer than required ER visit. I was accustomed to receiving attention when have you lived as long as I have? How to rule a space, yet this was distinct. This wasn't a show of respect, or this was something casual flirtation, something more profound that sent a charge directly through me, warming me in certain spots, which had been ignored for too long. Mike, my spouse, was seated across from me, unaware that he was constantly unaware these days, preoccupied with his company and his investments. We had arrived at this eatery with his phone. However, for a meal celebrating an early anniversary, there was little sense of a celebration. We were merely according to custom, completing another item on the list of things that married couples should do, but the waiter noticed me and he truly saw me, and I could sense his gaze even. It was heady while I wasn't looking. I felt reckless, but I didn't indulge. The first time he brushed in years against me, I believed it to be an incident. The second I became aware of it wasn't when he bent to replenish my. His fingers barely touched my water. A quick, chilling touch on the wrist, I looked up at him through me, and he grinned slowly and knowingly, which made my stomach twist in the tastiest manner. Although I didn't yet know his name, I was aware that I was curious about everything, about him, his age, and his thoughts, wondering what he wanted from me at night. Mike was hardly aware that I had moved in. My chair is slightly angled forward to allow my dress's tiny strap to slide. The waiter came down my shoulder, observed that he forcefully swallowed his Adams. He was struggling to keep his apple from bobbing. His gaze on my face at that moment gave me the note, which was brief, a neatly tucked piece of folded paper. I didn't touch anything other than my dessert spoon, it immediately making me maintain my neutral expression as I grabbed my fingers ached to open the wine instead, it to eat up anything he had to say. I had to exercise caution as I navigated within. Mike may have been preoccupied, but he wasn't blind, so I waited till he took a call and excused himself before, under the table, I unfolded the note. In 5 minutes, meet me at the rear exit. I inhaled deeply, feeling my heart pounding in my chest, which was a foolish risk. Reckless risk-taking, but I hadn't felt really alive for years, and all of a sudden I wanted to, so I grinned when Mike came back. He didn't have any charisma or ease about him. See that my heart was pounding so quickly that his body was pulsing with excitement. Hardly gave me a glance when he requested I excused myself to use the restroom to check. Instead, I slipped and walked past it. Via the silent corridor that led to my heels in the rear of the eatery, clicked on the shiny floor each time, bringing me one step closer to whatever the air was waiting for me outside that door. It was warm outside and filled with the aroma of summertime, plus something extra. He was waiting for me leaning, and he was dangerous. Arms crossed against the brick wall above his chest, believed you wouldn't show up. Whispered in a low voice and smooth, I don't typically do such things. I told him this, and it wasn't a lie. Bent into a smirk, perhaps it's time for you to begin. I should have walked instead of turning around. Away, but instead I took a step. Getting closer and letting his eyes drop never left my side. The silent assurance in his eyes tightening my gut. With he stepped closer in expectation of his body's heat was evident even in my breath caught in the heavy summer air. But I didn't leave you because you enjoy playing with. His voice was low, don't you think? I swallowed the teasing test whisper, enduring the usual rush of uncontrolled enthusiasm throbbing through me. Perhaps I acknowledged that his lips quirked into that same smug grin, but without. He reached for my hand and said another word. His fingers curved around mine for a time. A slight touch caused the pulse to quicken, but it caused me to feel something. Something savage and buried deep under years of daily life and predictability, so I followed his lead. Down within the shadowy alley behind the sounds of clinking in the restaurant, fading of glasses and muffled conversations. My heartbeat was thundering behind us, in my ears a constant cadence of expectation, and something else that could be harmful near. He said, "Desire, tell me," pausing as we arrived at a remote. "How long has it been since, corner? Someone gave you the same look that I do." Paused, my thoughts momentarily flickering to mic to my life that I had created so cautiously throughout the years, an existence full of appearances, anticipations, obligations, in a life that, for all its security, had made me feel even more alone. More than I wanted to. Admittedly, I waited too long before whispering his. I traced the inside of my wrist with my fingers. Slow, purposeful movement that caused my skin to. It's unfortunate that his voice made you tingle. Lowering a woman like you even more, I should have walked because it deserves to be seen. Away, I ought not have disregarded the heat seething in our relationship the way his eye was electrified by their presence. But I didn't. Rather, I leaned forward, letting myself to slink deeper into the delectable risk of the instant he took. I took one more step forward and cocked my chin. Up to look into his eyes were full with something that hadn't been there for a while. Time, unadulterated hunger of the sort that caused my skin and thoughts to flush. Became unclear, and then abruptly his lips brushed mine as he moved, a shiver-inducing whisper of a kiss. It was a test question that sent shivers down my spine, and I responded by shutting the distance, totally forcing my mouth against. At first, the kiss was slow, exploratory, but it was quick for his hands to glide, it must deepen. I'm flushed against him by my waist, entangled finger in his hair and a gentle. As he squeezed me, I let out a sound. I was up against the cool brick wall. The way he touched me was like drowning in him. The way he somehow made me feel wanted. It was reckless, and I hadn't in years. Hazardous intoxication, and I was unable to bring myself to be concerned once we torn apart. My heart was out of breath. He glanced down at me while he pounded. Expression, "I want more," he said with his thumb, unreadable, scratching my bottom lip, although I was unaware of it, what he meant, and I was fully aware of what I was going to go where I had spoken. Whispered, he smirked as he pulled out a slip, wobbly. Of the paper he took out of his pocket and tucked in my address in my hand. Tonight, I firmly swallowed the burden of what I was going to do was to settle in my chest. Yet all I experienced in place of terror was, I nodded in anticipation while holding the paper. Firmly, the drive to his apartment tonight felt my hands held the object for longer than it was. Gripped the steering wheel firmly, my knuckles going white. With the streetlights low, the little his address was on a slip of paper that was folded a silent pledge in my lap of the I could still feel his lips throughout the upcoming night. The ghost of his touch lingering on mine like an implicit invitation on my skin, I could go back home and act like there was none. Of this occurred, but the notion of returning to my home and entering that my gut twisted coldly from existence. Distance between my marriage and Mike's hardly acknowledged me until it was essential. I hit the gas pedal, choking, just a little more difficult. The address directed me to a small apartment building on the more tranquil. It was not the most opulent side of town, sort of location I was accustomed to, but that simply intensified the excitement when I parked. I noticed my image in the rearview mirror. My lips and pupils were dilated in the mirror. I unsteadily parted my breath a little. Didn't appear to be the calm woman I was meant to be, but I appeared to be hungry. When I knocked on the door, my fingers shook. opened nearly instantly, and there he was the instant I entered the air. Changed, and there was a lot of excitement. His smell wrapper was faintly lighted in the room. His apartment was plain around me, a bit messy, lives in sharp contrast. To the painstakingly planned house I discussed with Mike here, nothing was. Nothing was positioned to impress. It was deliberate. He was just himself, unadulterated. Shut the door after me, his body shut enough for me to sense his warmth. Didn't talk, and I didn't say anything. Weren't required for us to remain silent, hummed with all of the previous constructing ever since our eyes met at the eatery when he eventually, his fingers skimmed my waist and caressed me. Exhaled a breath. I didn't realize I'd been gripping his fingers, moved slowly, deliberately, like he was relishing every second. Lee, he wasn't rushing, nor was I the one who needed to be drawn out. Expanded into something I will never forget. I raised my head to meet his eyes there. There wasn't any uncertainty in his eyes. His fingers slid down his hold with assurance, tensing up just enough to hurt me. Before my thoughts could react, my body did, wanting more of his lips. Pressing into him, discovered the pulse lingering near my neck. I shivered as I threaded my hands. Through his hair, drawing him nearer. Each brush of his mouth, each contact against my skin further untangled me, kept Mike out of their thoughts. On the repercussions that are currently occurring in this, for a time, only the fire was flowing, the warmth of his body through me. I had been starving for this careless abandonment. I wanted to see the woman who shrugged, believed she could take something that wasn't hers, but now that I do, I believe I am. I finished here, curling my fingers into my breath was still wrapped in the sheet, arriving in brief, irregular bursts that I desired to shout and lash out at them both. However, what was the purpose of my entrance? I had this with my eyes wide open, ignored all the warning signs and left me alone, drawn into something that was never. He said to her, "Be honest, you're leaving." Inscrutable tone, she sighed. "Of course I'm going, but we'll discuss later." She turned to look at me one last time, and left, the door clicking shut behind them. The quiet that ensued behind her was, his expression when he glanced at me was deafening. I'm hurt. I never intended for this to occur. Like this, I laughed bitterly and, "What was your exact prediction for the outcome of this? Did you think we would just continue to sneak? Indefinitely, that I would never discover I wasn't sure how to let you know that I didn't wish to let you go." I shook my head. Everything's weight falling on me. His jaw was the first thing you had me for, clenched his hands at his sides. "I know you felt something for me. Did, and now it doesn't matter." "Raw," I said in a whisper. "You have someone, another somebody who, in spite of all, still arrived here in search of you that has a lot to say, doesn't it?" He didn't respond, and I realized that this was really over at that point. Whatever heat we had, and we had been drawn together by passion, constructed on a foundation that will never last. After getting out of bed, I gathered my clothes. I could feel his eyes through trembling hands. I could sense his pull on me even. Now I had to look at him, but I didn't want to. I had to leave before I could stay here. I took an even more stupid action, like as pardoning. He said, "Don't go like this." I covered my head with my garment in silence. Using shaking to smooth the fabric down, fingers tell me what else I should do. He had no response, so I walked away. To the door, scarcely pausing for a moment. Prior to go outside into the cool morning air, my mind was racing and my heart felt heavy, but I continued to move after giving in to temptation, which I now had to deal with. The repercussions, the streets were silent. The city was just starting to wake up, so I taking a deep breath and attempting to steady myself, had erred. But I would not make once more. His voice sounded hoarse as "I've desired this since the day I finally spoke. I let out a little laugh the moment I spotted you. You're not Al, you're breathless and unstable." I was alone when his hands gripped me tightly. His mouth lingered over mine before ceasing. I didn't need to be told, so I held back. I rushed forward twice, catching his lips with mine, allowing all of his hands roamed my body as his control slipped away. Mapping every inch of his body as though he had to commit it to memory, I sucked against his mouth as he effortlessly lifted me, bringing me farther inside. I desired to be eaten, and he was more than happy to. The early light poured in to comply, through the blinds casting cracks a golden glow in the strange room. My body continued to hum from the previous evening, prior to each muscle becoming delightfully aching, each living neuron with the remains of, I could hear the sound of his touch. Water dripping from the bathroom next door, and I was aware that he was still nearby. I arched my back and stretched my limbs, allowing the crisp sheets to slide a little lower on my body. The truth about what I did was settling in, but rather than feeling guilty there, I felt a deep, boiling sense of satisfaction. Stepped into something and crossed a line. Hazardous, and I had no regrets about my physique. Still throbbed with his echoes, his mouth, his hands, and his muttered words in a gentle knock on the door. In the darkness, I was startled out of my reverie and sat up. Heart pounding, nobody ought to be present. One ought to be aware that he left the loosely wrapped towel in the bathroom, water drips slipping down his waist. He caught the taut lines of his chest, the expression on my face, and right away. "Oh, someone's here," he said in a low voice. I swallowed hard, awake, although I'm not sure I heard His jaw tensed as he crossed the space in 3 lengthy steps, pausing only to. He glanced at me before the door. His face was inscrutable before he opened. A woman was standing across from it. Blonde, tall, and incredibly attractive, she was the type of lady who was supposed to be in upscale boutiques and beautiful periodicals. Still, her gaze shifted from him to me. Amidst the blankets and a gradual understanding, she whispered, her lips curving into a smile. "I wanted to know when I would eventually be able to. My stomach fell when I met you," and he stiffened. "However, you didn't back down. What are you doing?" She crossed her arms and moaned here. Didn't respond to my texts, so I assumed I'd come a view from my own perspective, and I see I tightened my grip on the sheet. My heartbeat is all around me. I questioned, thumping, "Who is she?" Notwithstanding I wasn't certain that I desired the response, the woman cocked her head, examining me as if something amazing. He hasn't told you that she chuckled softly, finding it interesting that believed you would be aware that I looked at he was looking for something in his face. Explanation or assurance of some sort, although I only saw a glimmer of something that made my chest illegible. Titan described my voice to me, more subdued than I had planned, peppered with something that is dangerously near. The woman stepped uneasily. "Declare that I am his." A dense stillness descended upon the room, and oppressive, as though the air had been pulled out of my lungs, I gazed at he was not pleading with him to refuse but instead he simply let out a breath. He closed his eyes slowly for a little moment. Of a second before we crossed paths once more. He didn't start it as you think, but I shook my head and felt my heart pounding on my, "Tell me what it is." "Ribs," I said. The woman's voice was no more than a whisper, leaned against the doorframe and grinned. "Oh, I would really like to hear this one as well." Ahead described the faraway hum. I could hear of traffic beyond the noise of the city progressing as I sat frozen. Right now, everything is falling apart. In real time, I had entered this voluntarily, allowed myself to think that I might have everything I desired without consequence, but the consequence had only it was staring at me when I knocked on the door. Directly in my face, and I hardly heard the no more city noise, the room had become smaller. My eyes narrowing until I could see just he and her were standing there, looking like 2 sides of a single destructive coin. His I attempted to construct words with my fiancé, compile my ideas into a piece. logical, but my thoughts were a jumbled mess. With surprise and treachery, my heart raced, shutting out everything in my ears. Otherwise, I muttered something. He ran a hand through his hair, raw. His face was split between anger and exasperation, and lament that it's not that way she, a dry, knowing laugh. Oh, it's, in that same moment, she turned to face my arms. Lips curled in amusement, still crossed. Did you believe you were alone, my friend? A sharp, hollow aching turned into the stomach, developed in my chest, but I resisted allowing I forcefully swallowed, as evidenced by my chin. Up despite the searing heat slid across my "How long has your engagement lasted?" skin, spoke more steadily than I felt when I questioned him. He paused for an excessive amount of time. She provided his answers for nearly a year. However, if we're being completely honest, I'm beginning to question whether I ought to use a year in the past tense. My breath caught. Indicating that he was with her at the time, he touched me for the first time when we initially met. He said in a whisper the words that had revealed a part of myself that I had. I was aware that this wasn't a romantic romance, wasn't hallucinogenic, yet this sensation. This was more than just an error, something ruthless, something calculating. His fingers brushed mine as he reached for me. Wrist. But I retreated as if he had touched me. I didn't want you to know that I was burned. He answered. I let out a hollow like this. Oh, I'm laughing. How were you? Preparing for me to learn at your wedding? His mouth clenched. I was about to, I'll tell you that she rolled her eyes. I turned to her because she was the woman I ought to be hateful, yet didn't she was not in any way the antagonist in this. She appeared to like my suffering, and you have just arrived here to. She cocked her head in a gloat. Taking into account that I didn't come to see how my fiancé has behaved as a woman, skulking around with dragging eyes over my evaluation figuring. And now I understand something about her speech pattern made me feel angry all over again. You can take him now that you have it. And leave. She smirked. But there was something sour underneath. I haven't made up my mind about it. I no longer desire him. And I believe that's what frightens him most. I looked at him and searched his face the most. For some sort of response, but he remained still. Wow, I'm mute, whispered. You're a genuine coward, aren't you? You? His eyes suddenly met mine, which is unfair. I chuckled sharply and without amusement. Sound reasonable, you wish to discuss fair. You deceived me so badly that I don't even determine whether there are more of us out. There. His fiancée exhaled, massaging her temple as though she had at last grown weary with the spectacle. I believe we're finished. I slowly breathed here, feeling the weight. As soon as they pressed down on me, there is nothing more to say that could I tried to remedy this or lessen the pain. Walking by was the only thing I could do. He went by her, took my purse, and walked away. The door behind me snapped shut, and I realized for the first time in a long time how isolated I was in the air. The humidity outdoors was high, yet it done nothing to put out the fire. My heels clicked against my skin. The sidewalk as I made my way to my vehicle each step and worked to maintain my composure, I couldn't tell what was making me feel so angry. Humiliation or the residual presence of he continued to press his hand against my skin. Perhaps all three, or perhaps something worse kept my knuckles on the steering wheel. Staring at the dashboard in white without. When I truly saw it, my body shook, and I just sat there for a while. My uneven breath drags the night in. Had exposed a terrible trick too quickly. That all I had left was the edges of reality are piercing me. Ought to have known better than to requested more questions that should have been seen the red flags. But instead, I allowed, I think, that something reckless, something hazardous, something that never, my phone buzzed in my bag before, paused before immediately reaching for it. I don't want to know who it would be. This will be the final time I look at the message that made my heart pound. Still believed that he could resolve this, believed that he could get me to have her. My fingers lingered over everything's screen divided between something and fury. Something else that is frighteningly similar to a knock on my window made me yearn. Leap! I turned, gasping for air as I observed her standing there with his fiancée. The woman who entered that flat and destroyed the illusion using nothing. I went down the list more than a name. Window waiting slowly without saying anything. Immediately just looked me over with. At last, something in her eyes was unreadable. She gave a little weary sigh. "You ought to block his number," she said. Her voice was quieter than I had anticipated. "He's skilled at giving you the impression that you're the soul." I swallowed it hard while holding the phone. "Why do you tell me?" She let out this breath. "Sharply since I've been in your shoes, and I will be if I don't leave him now. Where are you again?" A sour chuckle escaped me, so what transpires? She now turned her gaze from me to the road, forward as though observing something I'm not sure, but I believe They both deserved better, so I slowly nodded. Feeling in my chest loosening just a little, "Yep, we do." She gave me one last look, then turned and walked away. Disappearing into the darkness, I watched her go. Then peeked at my phone again. The message still hovered on the screen, waiting for a reaction. I erased it, then I blocked his number. The weight of it settled over me, weighty but freeing. I had stepped into something dangerous, something that had devoured me, but I wasn't going to let it destroy me. Not anymore. I started the automobile, my hands solid now, and pulled onto the road. The darkness spread before me, black and open, and for the first time for a while, I didn't know where I was. Going, and maybe that was precisely what I had to drive miles to see the city lights. Allowing for wide sections of the road, I didn't know where I was heading, only that I desired to be far away from the side of myself that lies in falsehood, that allowed this to occur at a fueling station. Its fluorescent lights loomed ahead. In the dark, flickering, I drew in the "I need a break" more than I want to. To continue moving within the air that smelled of gasoline and old coffee, I took a bottle of water and headed to the scarcely recognizing the clerk at the counter. "Difficult night?" he inquired, looking at my purchase. I chuckled briefly. Could claim that he gave a nod similar to recognized giving me my, occasionally, a drive aids in clearing. I took the money and brushed my fingertips. That's what I'm up against. I sipped slowly as I hoped to get back in my car. Gazing at the horizon out of water, I could continue running and driving. Yet ultimately, I would have to choose where to move on from who I was in the past. I now had the power to influence the future, and for the first time in ages, I felt all set to assume command.